When people imagine an EMP attack, they picture drama. A bright flash in the sky, sparks flying from outlets, cars crashing as engines die. The kind of spectacle that announces catastrophe with visible signs, with warnings you can see and hear and respond to. But an EMP isn't like that. At 11:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday in June, a nuclear warhead detonates 280 miles above central Kansas. The yield is 1.4 megatons. The altitude is precise, calculated to maximize electromagnetic coverage while minimizing direct blast effects. No city is destroyed. No building collapses. No firestorm erupts. The detonation releases a pulse of electromagnetic radiation that spreads at the speed of light. The E1 component, lasting nanoseconds, induces massive voltage spikes in all electronics within line of sight. The E2 component, similar to lightning but more sustained, continues the damage. The E3 component, lasting minutes, creates currents in long conductors like power lines and pipelines, destroying transformers and control systems across entire regions. The coverage area is continental, from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachians. Approximately 200 million people within the affected zone. They don't see the flash. They don't hear the detonation. They don't know anything happened until their phone goes dark, their car stops running, and the electrical hum that has been the soundtrack of modern life simply vanishes. The collapse begins not with violence, but with silence. The sudden, absolute absence of the invisible infrastructure that sustains 335 million people. And in that silence, civilization begins its rapid dissolution. This is what happens when an EMP hits the United States, not in years, not in months, overnight. The mechanisms of collapse, the timeline of failure. The moment when the most technologically advanced nation on Earth reverts to conditions not seen since the 19th century. You don't prepare for this. You endure it. If you survive at all. At 11 hours 47 minutes and 3 seconds AM EST, the pulse arrives. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't target military systems preferentially. It affects everything with circuitry, with microchips, with electronic components vulnerable to voltage surge. Your phone dies mid-sentence. His screen goes black. No warning. No graceful shutdown. Just instant cessation of function. You press the power button. Nothing. The battery is full, but the phone is inert. Circuit boards fried by voltage spikes they were never designed to withstand. Around you, the same phenomenon repeats across devices. Computers, tablets, smartwatches. Everything electronic that lacks military-grade hardening stops working simultaneously. In offices, trading screens go dark. In hospitals, monitoring equipment fails. In cars, engine control modules cease functioning, stranding vehicles wherever they happen to be at 11:47 a.m. The effect is not universal. Some electronics survive. Older vehicles without computerized systems continue running. Simple appliances with minimal circuitry remain functional. But modern integrated circuits, the foundation of contemporary technology, are exceptionally vulnerable. The smaller the component, the more easily destroyed by induced current. At 11 hours 47 minutes and 14 seconds a.m., the electrical grid begins to collapse. Not everywhere simultaneously. The cascade follows the architecture of interconnection. Transformers fail as induced currents exceed their design tolerances. Protection systems designed to isolate damaged sections trigger, but the scale of failure overwhelms them. Regional grids that were synchronized minutes ago fragment into isolated sections, then fail entirely as load imbalances create cascading shutdowns. By 11:48 a.m., 1 minute after the pulse, 73% of the continental United States has lost power. The remaining 27% is isolated into pockets that will fail over the next hours as operators cannot coordinate restoration. as fuel supplies cannot reach generators, as the complex interdependencies of grid operation cannot function without communication networks. You're in an office building. The lights go out. The computer dies. The air conditioning stops. For a moment, there's confusion. Power outages happen. They're temporary. Someone makes a joke about forgetting to pay the electric bill. Then someone notices that everyone's phone is dead. All of them. Every device in the room. The confusion becomes concern. Outside, you can hear the sound of traffic. Not moving traffic. Stopped traffic. Horns honking. Voices rising. The particular quality of many people realizing something is wrong simultaneously. You move to the window. The street below is filled with cars, stopped in place, drivers emerging to examine engines that won't restart. At 11:49 a.m., 2 minutes after the pulse, you understand this is not a normal outage. The scope is too large. The effect too complete. This is systemic failure of infrastructure you never thought about because it always worked. The electrical hum that was the background noise of modern life is gone. In its place is something older. Voices, footsteps, wind, the sounds of a world that operates without machines. You realize you're trapped. Elevators are dead. Electronic locks have failed to safe mode on some doors, sealing them, or to open mode on others, leaving them unsecured. Stairwells become the only option. You join the flow of people moving downward, office workers and business casual, not yet understanding that the workday has ended permanently. At 11:52 a.m., 5 minutes after the pulse, you emerge onto the street. The scene is orderly but confused. Cars stopped mid-intersection. Traffic lights dark. People standing in clusters, talking, speculating, checking phones that won't work. No panic yet. Just the communal attempt to understand what's happening. Someone suggests going home. The suggestion spreads. People begin walking. Not frantically, purposefully. The instinct to return to familiar territory, to family, to the safety of home. But home for many is miles away. The buses aren't running. The subway is dark. Cars are useless. A city of 8 million people must move on foot. The walking begins. The initial phase of collapse. The moment when urbanization reveals its vulnerability. When population density that seemed efficient becomes a liability. When the distance between work and home, negligible with transportation, becomes an obstacle measured in hours of walking. At noon, 13 minutes after the pulse, the first fights break out, not over food, not over water, over information. Someone claims to know what happened. Someone else disagrees. The tension of not knowing, of being disconnected from the news and authority and explanation, manifests as conflict. The arguments are brief. Everyone is too focused on their own concerns to sustain confrontation. By 12:15 p.m., the reality begins to settle. The power isn't coming back soon. The phones aren't restarting. This is not a temporary disruption. This is fundamental systems failure. And with that understanding comes the first calculations of survival. How far to home? What food is available? How to get water when the taps stop flowing? The first hour ends not with chaos, but with realization. The world has changed. The conveniences that define modern life are gone. What remains is the immediate, the physical, the problems that cannot be solved by calling for help, because there is no one to call and no way to reach them. By 1 p.m., 2 hours after the pulse, the secondary failures begin. These are the systems that depend on electricity, but have backup power, generators that can run for hours or days. Hospitals shift to emergency generators. Data centers activate battery backups. Cell towers attempt to function on limited reserve power, but generators require fuel. Fuel pumps require electricity. The resupply chain is broken. The backup systems are not permanent solutions. They're temporary bridges to restoration that isn't coming. One by one, as fuel exhausts and batteries drain, these systems fail. Cell towers go dark in sequence. The ones with the smallest fuel reserves first, rural towers with minimal backup. Then suburban towers. Finally, urban towers with larger generators, but serving denser populations that drain battery reserves faster. By 3 p.m., 4 hours after the pulse, cellular communication is effectively dead nationwide. The isolation is complete. You cannot call anyone. You cannot text. You cannot access information. The device that connected you to the world is now an inert rectangle of glass and metal. The psychological effect is immediate and profound. Modern humans are not adapted to disconnection. The absence of communication creates anxiety that builds with each failed attempt to reach someone. Water systems begin failing at different rates, depending on infrastructure. Municipal water relies on electrical pumps to maintain pressure. Some systems have elevated tanks that provide gravity feed for hours. Others pressurize directly from ground level, failing immediately. By 2 p.m., 3 hours after the pulse, approximately 40% of urban areas have lost water pressure. By 4 p.m., that number reaches 70%. You're home now. The walk took 2 hours. Your legs ache. You're thirsty. You turn the faucet. Water flows, but the pressure is weak. You fill every container you have. Pots, bottles, the bathtub. The water slows to a trickle, then stops. The last drops fall from the tap like a countdown ending. The toilets won't flush, not without water pressure. The sewage system requires pumps to lift waste through treatment plants. Without power, the system backs up. Within 24 hours, urban sanitation will fail completely. The invisible infrastructure that made cities habitable vanishes. Food supply chains break immediately. Grocery stores have inventory for approximately 3 days of normal operation. In crisis, that inventory disappears in hours. By 2:30 p.m., the first stores see runs on supplies. Not organized looting, just mass purchasing by people who understand that resupply won't occur. The shelves empty in waves. Water first, then canned goods, then everything else. By 4 p.m., 5 hours after the pulse, most stores are empty. Some have locked doors to prevent crowd surges. Others have been overwhelmed. The economic system that efficiently distributed resources across 335 million people has ceased functioning. What remains is what exists in immediate inventory. No more trucks arriving. No more warehouses shipping. No more just-in-time logistics coordinating supply to demand. Banks are inaccessible. ATMs are dark. Credit cards don't work. The financial system, entirely digital, has disappeared. The cash in your wallet is the only money that exists for you now. And cash loses meaning rapidly when there's nothing to buy. By 5 p.m., 6 hours after the pulse, hospitals are in crisis. Emergency generators are still functioning at major facilities, but the equipment is failing. Modern medical devices, CT scanners, ventilators, monitoring systems require microprocessors that were destroyed by the pulse. Backup machines exist, but they're limited. The ratio of patients to functional equipment is catastrophic. Pharmacies have no power for refrigeration. Insulin, vaccines, biologics requiring cold storage begin degrading. People with chronic conditions requiring regular medication face immediate crisis. Diabetics, heart patients, those with autoimmune disorders. The pharmaceutical supply chain that kept them alive operates on short inventory cycles. When resupply stops, medication runs out in days. You check your supplies. The food in your refrigerator will spoil within 24 hours without power. The freezer contents might last 48 hours if you don't open it. After that, you have whatever dry goods and canned food you happen to have. For most Americans, that's less than a week's supply. For many, it's less than 3 days. The calculation is simple and brutal. How long can you survive on what you have? The answer for most people is not long enough. By 6 p.m., 7 hours after the pulse, the sun begins its descent. The approach of darkness carries psychological weight. In normal times, darkness means lights. Now it means absolute dark. No streetlights. No building illumination. No electronic glow from devices. Just the natural darkness that cities haven't experienced in over a century. You light candles if you have them. Flashlights if the batteries survived or you had spares. But batteries have finite life. Candles burn down. The question is not whether you have light tonight, but whether you'll have it in a week, in a month, when the immediate supplies exhaust. By 7 p.m., 8 hours after the pulse, the first violence begins. Not widespread, not yet, but targeted. Stores with remaining inventory. Pharmacies with medication. Gas stations where manual pumps might still work. The desperate start to take what they need, because asking is futile when no authority remains to mediate. Police response is minimal. Radio communications are dead. Patrol cars with electronic systems are stranded. Officers respond on foot, if they respond at all. Many choose family over duty, when duty means walking into violence without backup, without communication, without resources. The thin blue line erodes because the infrastructure that enabled it has vanished. Fire services face similar collapse. Fire trucks with electronic controls are unusable. Water pressure for hydrants is failing. Communication with dispatch is impossible. When fires start, and they will start as people use candles and improvised heating, the response capacity is 19th century at best. By 8 o'clock p.m., 9 hours after the pulse, you can see the stars, really see them. Without light pollution, the night sky appears as it did before electrification. The beauty is profound and unsettling. It represents the absence of everything that made modern life function. The temperature is dropping. It's June, so cold isn't immediately lethal, but climate control is gone. In winter, this would be a death sentence for millions. In summer heat, it will be. Air conditioning isn't a luxury in southern states. It's survival infrastructure. Its absence will kill the elderly, the sick, the vulnerable. By 9 p.m., 10 hours after the pulse, the sounds of the city have changed. No traffic, no aircraft, no machinery, just voices carried on wind. Some are conversations. Some are arguments. Some are cries for help that no one can answer. The auditory landscape of human civilization without technological mediation. You try to sleep, but can't. Not from noise, from silence. The absence of the constant background hum that was always present. The refrigerator motor, the GVAC system, the distant traffic. These sounds were so constant you stopped hearing them. Their absence is deafening. By 11 p.m., 12 hours after the pulse, the realization is complete. This is not temporary. The power will not return tomorrow. The phones will not restart. The systems that failed are not reparable in days or weeks. The transformers destroyed number in the thousands. The manufacturing capacity to replace them does not exist domestically. The supply chains to import them are broken. The expertise to install them is limited and geographically dispersed. The restoration timeline, if restoration occurs at all, is measured in years, multiple years, perhaps decades in some regions. And the question facing 200 million people in the affected zone is simple and terrible. How do you survive years without electricity when you have supplies for days? By dawn on day 2, approximately 20 hours after the pulse, the migrations begin, not organized evacuations. Spontaneous movement driven by calculation that staying means death. Urban populations attempting to reach rural areas where food production occurs, where population density is lower, where survival seems more plausible. The highways become foot traffic. Cars sit where they stopped, now obstacles to movement. People walk carrying what they can: bottled water, canned food, clothing, weapons for those who have them. The exodus is silent. No one has energy for conversation. Walking all day requires calories that are already being rationed. The scale is unprecedented. 10 million people attempting to leave New York City. 4 million from Los Angeles. 3 million from Chicago. The numbers exceed anything infrastructure was designed to handle even when it functioned. Roads designed for vehicles become congested with pedestrians. Bridges become bottlenecks where crowds compress into dangerous density. By noon on day 2, 24 hours after the pulse, the first deaths occur not from violence, but from exposure and exhaustion. The elderly who cannot maintain the pace. The sick who need medication no longer available. The diabetic without insulin. The heart patient without prescriptions. They collapse on roadsides. Sometimes others stop to help. More often, they're stepped around. The math of survival is personal now. You cannot save everyone. Most people cannot save anyone beyond their immediate family. Hospitals are overwhelmed beyond function. Emergency generators are running dry. The fuel trucks that would resupply them are dead on highways. Doctors perform triage without equipment, reverting to clinical judgment based on visual assessment because diagnostic machines are inert. The decisions are medieval. Who receives the limited care available? Who is left to die because resources cannot stretch to everyone? Medical ethics designed for abundance fail under scarcity. The doctor who saves this patient cannot save the next 3. The choices compound into numbers that will haunt whoever survives to count them. Water becomes the first critical shortage. The human body requires 2 liters per day minimum. More in heat. More under exertion. Urban populations lack access to natural water sources. Rivers and lakes are surrounded by territory, by property rights that start to be enforced with violence when owners realize their water supply is the most valuable asset they possess. People drink from sources they shouldn't. Contaminated water. Untreated sewage. The immediate thirst overrides future disease risk. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid, diseases that hadn't been major concerns in America for a century, begin their return. The die-off from waterborne illness will exceed the immediate casualties of the EMP itself. By evening on day 2, social order is fragmenting, not everywhere, not completely, but in enough locations to demonstrate the pattern. Some neighborhoods organize, block committees, resource sharing, cooperative security. These communities will have the highest survival rates because humans are social animals. Isolation is death strategy. Other areas descend into competition. Every family for itself. Hoarding what they have, defending it with force. These strategies might work short-term for the strong, but they fail at scale. You cannot defend your house indefinitely. You cannot grow food without cooperation. The communities that fragment will consume themselves. By midnight, 36 hours after the pulse, the transformation is visible even in darkness. Cities that glowed from space are black. The arterial light of highways is gone. Only scattered fires mark human presence, burning in barrels and fireplaces and improvised hearths. From orbit, if satellites still functioned, America would look as it did in 1800, isolated points of light in vast darkness. The first day ends not with resolution, but with understanding. The old world is gone. The new world operates by rules most Americans don't know and haven't practiced. The learning curve is steep. The tuition is paid in lives. By day 3, 60 hours after the pulse, the migration exodus slows. Not because people reached destinations, because exhaustion, dehydration, and injury stop forward movement. The highways become trails of abandoned belongings. Suitcases too heavy to carry, food containers emptied. The debris of an entire civilization attempting to move on foot. Some groups adapt successfully. They establish camps, organize water collection, ration food, create security watches. These nascent communities are the seeds of whatever society might emerge from collapse, but they're fragile. Leadership is informal. Resources are limited. Conflict simmers beneath cooperative surface. By day 4, the government attempts to respond, but command and control is shattered. Washington can communicate with military bases that have hardened systems, but coordination with civilian infrastructure is impossible. The president can broadcast orders, but no one receives them. The federal government becomes effectively irrelevant outside military installations. Local authority matters now. Mayors, sheriffs, town councils. The officials who can reach their constituents on foot, who can coordinate by word of mouth, who can organize with pre-industrial communication methods. Some rise to the challenge. Others abandon their posts. The variation is complete. By day 5, barter economies emerge. Currency still exists, but its value is questionable. People trade goods for goods, canned food for medicine, batteries for water, skills for supplies. The mechanic who can fix pre-electronic vehicles becomes more valuable than the software engineer. The nurse knows basic medicine becomes essential. The accountant who cannot contribute physical skills loses status. The economic restructuring is rapid and brutal. Credentials don't matter. Performance matters. You're valuable if you can do something others need. If you can't, you're a consumer of limited resources. The meritocracy that emerges is based on practical skill, not education or previous wealth. By day 6, 144 hours after the pulse, the death toll begins to be visible. Not from violence primarily, from cascade failures. The medication-dependent dying without prescriptions. The elderly succumbing to exposure. The sick overwhelming limited medical capacity. The chronically ill who required technological support to survive. The death rate won't be calculable for months, but estimates will eventually reach into millions. By day 7, 1 week after the pulse, the scope of collapse is total. No power anywhere in the affected zone. No communication networks. No supply chains. No functional government beyond local level. No medical care beyond basic first aid. No food production beyond immediate harvest of what's already planted. No water beyond what can be manually pumped or collected from natural sources. The United States, as a unified nation-state, has ceased to exist functionally. What remains are regional territories, local communities, family units attempting to survive until some restoration occurs. But restoration requires infrastructure that was destroyed. Repair requires resources that aren't available. The tools to fix modern systems are themselves modern systems that failed. The question isn't how quickly recovery happens. It's whether recovery happens at all. Whether America can rebuild with a fraction of its previous population. Whether survivors have the knowledge to restore what was lost when most of that knowledge existed in digital form that vanished with the pulse. By the end of the first week, a new reality has established itself. This is not temporary disruption. This is civilizational reset. The trajectory forward is measured not in days until normal returns, but in years until new normal emerges. And that new normal will resemble the old world as much as the old world resembled the Stone Age. By week 2, 14 days after the pulse, the survivors have sorted themselves into patterns. Some have reached stable situations. Rural areas with farms, with wells, with populations small enough to sustain on local resources. These regions will endure, will adapt, will eventually thrive in the new environment. Others remain in crisis. Urban cores where population density exceeds carrying capacity by orders of magnitude. These areas will depopulate, not through organized relocation, through attrition. The death rate in Manhattan will exceed 90% within 6 months. Not from violence, from starvation, disease, and the basic arithmetic that 1.6 million people cannot survive on an island with minimal food production and limited water sources. The suburban zones face different challenges. Lower density than urban, but still dependent on external supply chains. Supermarkets are long empty. Gardens can provide some food, but not enough for everyone. Suburban communities will fragment into micro-territories, individual streets becoming defensive zones, cooperation existing only within tight boundaries. By week 3, new authorities emerge, not elected, not appointed, just individuals who take responsibility for organization and others follow. The military veteran who coordinates neighborhood security, the teacher who organizes education for children, the retired doctor who treats injuries with limited supplies. These informal leaders become the governance structure of the new world. By week 4, 1 month after the pulse, the seasonal reality becomes clear. It's July. Planting season has passed for most crops. The food in storage will not last until next harvest. The gap between available supplies and minimum needs is unbridgeable through conservation. Starvation is not possible. It's guaranteed. The only question is scale. The survivors face the most fundamental challenge: how to produce food without industrial agriculture, without fertilizers, without pesticides, without irrigation systems, without fuel for tractors. How to grow enough calories to sustain even a reduced population using only manual labor and pre-industrial techniques. Some communities have the knowledge. Rural populations with farming backgrounds. Others must learn rapidly. The learning curve is steep. The failures are fatal. A field planted wrong yields no crop. A harvest handled poorly spoils. The margin for error is 0. By month 1, the psychological adaptation is as significant as the physical. People who are connected to thousands through social media are now isolated to whoever they can see and speak to directly. The digital world that seemed permanent has vanished. The identity many people constructed online is gone. What remains is immediate, physical, the person you can touch. The adaptation is easier for some than others. The elderly who remember life before internet, the rural populations who maintain traditional skills, the prepared who took the threat seriously. The adjustment is hardest for digital natives, for urban professionals, for those whose entire existence was mediated by technology that no longer exists. By the end of the first month, the scope of loss is incalculable. Millions dead, millions more dying. Infrastructure destroyed beyond immediate repair. Knowledge lost when experts died without transferring skills. The continuity of civilization fractured. But life continues, not for everyone, not easily. But human persistence is remarkable. Communities adapt. Knowledge is shared. Skills are learned. Slowly, incrementally, the survivors begin constructing something new from the ruins of what was lost. The EMP was a single event. The pulse lasted seconds. But the consequences unfold across years. The first year sees population decline from approximately 335 million to perhaps 200 million through starvation, disease, and violence. The second year stabilizes at a lower level as survivors adapt to carrying capacity. By year 3, the population might settle around 150 million, less than half the pre-pulse total. The geographic distribution changes completely. Cities empty, rural areas populate, the coasts lose importance. The interior regions with agricultural land become centers of survival. The map of America is redrawn not by political boundaries, but by resource access. Water, land, food production capacity. Technology regresses to levels sustainable without electrical infrastructure. Mechanical tools, manual agriculture, local manufacturing. The complexity of modern technology required global supply chains that no longer exist. What remains is what can be produced locally with available materials. For most communities, that means 19th century technology at best. Knowledge preservation becomes critical. The information stored digitally is lost. What remains is printed books, human memory, and skills that can be taught person to person. Libraries become more valuable than before, not for entertainment, but for practical knowledge. How to farm without machinery. How to treat illness without modern medicine. How to purify water. How to preserve food. Some information is lost forever. Specialized technical knowledge held by few experts who died. Manufacturing processes documented only in digital form. Scientific research stored on servers that failed. The dark age that follows the pulse is not metaphorical. It's literal loss of accumulated knowledge. But humans are adaptive. The communities that survive will rebuild, slower than before, different than before. But the trajectory is forward, even if the starting point is centuries in the past. The question is not whether civilization recovers. It's what form that recovery takes and how many generations it requires. An EMP attack on the United States would cause collapse that is total, rapid, and devastating. Not because the pulse itself is directly lethal, but because modern society is completely dependent on electrical infrastructure that cannot be quickly restored once destroyed at scale. The death toll would exceed any war in American history, not from the attack directly, but from the cascade failures that follow: starvation, disease, exposure, violence. The causes vary, but the result is the same. Population decline, measured in tens of millions within the first year. The recovery timeline is measured in decades at minimum. The transformers destroyed number in the thousands. The manufacturing capacity to replace them is limited. The expertise to restore the grid is concentrated in populations that may not survive the initial collapse. Even with perfect coordination and unlimited resources, grid restoration would take years. Without those advantages, it takes longer. The society that emerges from collapse will not resemble the society that preceded it. The technological sophistication is lost. The global interconnection is broken. The population density is reduced. What remains operates at lower complexity, with lower expectations, with lower carrying capacity. This is the reality of EMP vulnerability, not science fiction. Not fear-mongering, just the mathematical consequence of complete dependence on infrastructure that is simultaneously critical and fragile. The electrical grid that powers 335 million lives is vulnerable to a single high-altitude detonation. The protection against this threat is limited. The consequences of failure are catastrophic. Society collapses overnight not because people change, but because the systems that sustain them fail. And in that failure, in that sudden return to conditions not experienced in living memory, the question each person faces is simple and terrible. Do you have what it takes to survive without everything that made modern life possible? For most, the answer is no. And that answer, multiplied across millions, is what collapse looks like. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the quiet, grinding reality of systems that failed and people who cannot adapt fast enough to matter. The pulse lasts seconds. The darkness lasts decades. That's the true cost of EMP vulnerability. Not the immediate effect, but the long descent that follows when civilization loses the foundation it was built on and must learn to walk again before it can rebuild.